afternoon, everyone. My name is Maika Sanderson, and I am the Grant Program Manager for the Farm to School Grant Program. I am so excited that you all are joining us today for the next hour to learn a bit more about how you can develop and write a successful application. The Farm to School Grant Program request for applications was released earlier this month. Hopefully you all have read the RFA and checked out the FAQ and started to have conversations about what potential project you would like to do. So this webinar is really designed to give you some tips and tricks and strategies to really developing a comprehensive application package. So today I'm also joined by two of my colleagues, one of which is Anna Arrowsmith. Anna, care to say a quick hello and introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, my name is Anna Arrowsmith and I am one of the grants officers for the Farm to School grants. I will be one of the contacts for these grants moving forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. And then I'm also joined by another colleague, Travis. Travis, you want to say a quick hello and introduction?
Hi, Maika. Thank you. My name is Travis Hearn, and I work with Maika here at the National Office. And I just want to echo what she said so far. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your day to join us. And we expect this presentation to be very helpful for everyone. So we're glad you could be here.
Thanks so much, Travis. All right, let's get started. So a few quick housekeeping things. So you may already, maybe you can already tell, but audio is disabled for participants in this webinar. So if you have a question, please make a comment in the chat box below, and we will make sure to answer it at the end of the webinar. Please note that your audio is through the computer. I know those who may be having audio issues will not be able to hear me say that. It is in fact on the slide, so hopefully you are reading that. And you are able to turn up your computer speakers. This webinar will be recorded, and we will make sure to share a copy of the PDF slides and a link to the recording with all those who have registered to participate today. But in addition, for folks who may not have registered or are interested, we're also going to post these resources on the grant applicant resource page as well. I'm seeing in the chat box that I'm sounding very fuzzy. I heard that on Travis's as well. Maybe what I could try to do is to dial back in. Okay. All right. So if y'all can be a little patient, I'm going to dial out and dial back in, and hopefully that'll fix the audio issues we're experiencing. Hello. We are now back. We are dialed back in. I think our audio issues have been resolved. If folks can tell me in the great, you are good, sounds better, can hear now, fantastic. All right, let's get going. Thank you so much for flagging that for us. Sometimes the line can be a little funky. So let's get started. We're a few minutes behind, and I want to make sure that we get through all of the content for today. So in terms of the agenda, the following things that we'll be going through over the next hour include aligning your proposal with the grant program priorities, building your grant writing team, writing the proposal narrative. So once you've decided which of the 3 grant track types that you are applying to and taking a look at that proposal narrative, we're going to give you some tips and tricks and kind of highlight some common missteps we've seen in the past so that you don't make them as well. We'll talk a little bit about your budget narrative and the match requirement just to make sure that folks kind of understand that piece of the proposal narrative. And then we'll go through some resources that you all can use as you're preparing to put together your grant application. And then of course we'll have some time for Q&A. All right. So I wanted to start off the conversation with, if you have not, please, I know it's a ginormous document, please go ahead and read that FY19 Farm to School Grant Program request for applications. While we try to provide you a lot of information on how to prepare your grant application, there are just a number of details and nuances to putting together the grant application package, and it's really critical that you refer to the RFA to make sure that you are following all of the necessary guidance, you have all of the required attachments, and that you're putting things in the proper format So make sure to read the RFA. In addition, folks often forget about checking out the frequently asked questions. We often get a lot of questions about eligibility, and how do I pick between the planning and implementation track? We have a lot of those answers in the FAQ document, so please make sure that you check that document out. And then number 3, make sure you bookmark and use the grant applicant resource page. So when I share out these PDF slides, the links will be clickable. Right now the FAQ document link is being updated, but if you go to the grants.gov website where our RFA is also posted, in the Related Documents tab you will see the FAQ document, so you can grab it there if you can't wait until we get it updated on our site by the end of this week. So just key reminders and tips for y'all at the outset. So let's dive into aligning the proposal with grant program priorities. So in terms of the grant program, there are 2 sets of priorities that are actually discussed in the RFA. And what you will see in the beginning of the RFA is a discussion of the grant program's legislative priorities. And we really wanted to demystify the jargon around FY19 priorities and legislative priorities, and what do they all mean, and how should you be taking them into consideration while you're preparing your grant application package. The way that I like to think about it is the legislative priorities really tell you what's the purpose of this grant program. When we, meaning the government, is giving out this money, what is the real purpose of giving out this funding? What are we seeking to accomplish? So it's really important that the projects that you all are developing and coming up with are really in alignment with the legislative priorities, that they're in alignment with the intent of the grant program. We will discuss a little bit later the idea behind FY19 priorities. But first, let's dig a little deeper into the intent of the grant program. So you want to make sure that before you start coming up with a project that you understand the intent of the grant program. And so I really wanted to demystify that for folks on the line. So the main goal of the grant program and this request for applications is to improve access to local foods in eligible schools. That is the heart of the grant program. That's what we're trying to accomplish by granting out this monies to the eligible entities. But what do we really mean by improve access to local foods in eligible schools? What's an eligible school? What does this really mean? What are local foods? So let's break this down a little bit. So first, it's important to recognize that an eligible school is one that operates the National School Lunch or Breakfast programs. These are 2 federal child nutrition programs. So you want to make sure that if your project involves targeting schools directly, that the schools that are within your target population or target audience actually operate 1 or 2 of these programs. We often get the question, well, what if I want to target the child and adult care food program or the summer food program? Is that allowable? Yes, your project may target those programs, but it's a requirement that those programs are operated at a school site in order to be eligible. Okay, so let's break down local foods. Typically people, when they think about local foods, they will think more on the vegetable fruit end of things, but we really want to be clear that local food spans the tray. So not only fruits and vegetables, but local dairy or local grains, local beans, local meat, poultry, fish. So all of these things constitute, all of these different food types constitute foods that you can be thinking about that you may be wanting to procure and get into the school meals program. The next question point of clarification is there is no federal definition for local foods. So really that is often defined at the local level. So depending on the seasonality, depending on where you're located in the country, depending on the kind of food that's being procured, the definition of local food can vary. So again, there's no federal definition for local food, so that definition is not determined by us, but at the local level. So with all of those points in mind, let's kind of reword what I said before. So the main goal of the grant program is to increase the amount of local foods served in the federal child nutrition programs. And again, yes, you can do child and adult care food program and the summer food service program, but if you are targeting those programs, they must be at a school site. And oftentimes why I wanted to make sure that we kind of touched on this idea is because sometimes we'll get really great, fantastic projects that just aren't in alignment with the intent of the grant program. So perhaps somebody says, you know, we really want to launch a garden. The garden is going to be a community garden, and we'll harvest all the goods that will go into the local community food bank. Really great project. Sounds fantastic. However, it isn't quite in alignment with the intent of the grant program, which is to get local foods into the school meals program. So perhaps that project needs to be revamped to think about, are there school gardens that could be launched at school sites? And can those school gardens be used as learning opportunities for students to get more familiar with local foods, be more interested in consuming them, and perhaps harvesting some of those that produce that is coming out of the garden and using them for taste tests, or figuring out how they can be incorporated into the actual meals that are being offered through the federal child nutrition programs. So again, it's about making those linkages and really making sure that your project is in alignment with the intent of the grant program. Okay. So when you're thinking about your projects, you might say, hey, like, where do I start? Like, I'm just kind of at a loss of where to begin. How can I start to think about a fantastic project that really is in alignment with the grant, with the intent of the grant program? And I want to be clear, there are many steps to increasing access to local foods in eligible schools. It's not just getting that local food directly into the meal program to be served, but also we need to couple that practice, which is key and critical, with ensuring that students understand where their food is coming from, that there is an agricultural education component or experiential activities that supplement the procurement of local foods, so that when that food is put in front of them, they are more apt to eat it. They are more engaged. So that is key. So doing things related to education or curriculum or experiential activities as it relates to agriculture is kind of a part and parcel of increasing local procurement in the child nutrition program. So again, to have a very successful project, often you'll see both sides of those things in a grant project. Or sometimes somebody who is applying has already, started to procure local foods, but now they're looking to, implement the education or curriculum side of it. So maybe their grant project only talks about education and curriculum, but in the project they really should make that linkage to say, hey, we're procuring local foods, but now we're really trying to bring in the other piece of it so that our students will get more engaged and be more excited about consuming these local foods that are being implemented, or served, I should say, in the child nutrition program. So one way to think about it when you're trying to figure out how can I come up with a project is the best projects solve problems. They solve a challenge. So a way to kind of identify what challenges could exist in your community or among your target audience is to think about the food system. And the food system has many parts to it, which you can see on the screen here. Production, which involves our agricultural producers. Processing, which could involve distributors. Distribution, which could involve manufacturers, and then consumption, which obviously involves our students who are at eligible schools. But there are many parts to the food system and many steps between getting that local food product from the farmer to the school. So think about what those obstacles and challenges might be for that process to happen, and how your project could potentially solve that problem. So let's think about project ideas that might, help or assist or provide a solution for issues that arise on the supply side. The supply side being agricultural producers, producers that are, growing our fruits and vegetables, or giving us our dairy, or is taking care of animals that are used for consumption by humans. So what are some of the challenges for those folks in terms of getting their product into schools? And so you might be thinking about agricultural producers sometimes have issues with meeting volume requirements. Certain districts need a larger amount of food than can be provided by a single producer. So maybe a project could be about developing a food hub that aggregates all the food from local producers in the area and meets the minimum volume requirements that school districts in the area are seeking. Perhaps providing training on selling products to school. How do you get schools to know that you exist or in the area? So perhaps offering some sort of marketing training to agricultural producers. Distribution issues. How do you keep your produce or goods at the right temperature while it's being moved from the farm to the school? So maybe equipment needs to be bought, or maybe certain techniques need to be taught to agricultural producers. So and the list goes on. I have a couple more examples on here. But again, it's really thinking about what are the challenges that producers face in getting their local product into schools, and how can farm-to-school funding provide a solution for that. So that's one way to kind of be thinking about it. Again, you could think about it in many different ways, but just trying to kind of open folks' minds to the broad range of allowable activities that are possible through this source of funding. So let's think about this from the demand side. So what are some typical issues for schools in terms of them being able to offer local food product in the federal child nutrition programs? So sometimes for schools it's about identifying and producing procurement language in their bids that really target local. So perhaps providing some sort of training or providing research services, partnership building are ways to address that issue. For some schools it's about marketing and promoting local food. So the creation of flyers and posters and an integrated campaign that could happen at the state level or at the district level. Some really fantastic work has been done in California that at the state level, in which local foods are kind of really promoted at the state agency level. So state agencies can kind of take that role to kind of create a integrated marketing campaign that encourages school districts to get local food into their child nutrition programs. Processing local foods. So, once you get raw product, we have to make sure that the equipment is there at schools to process it, and that food service staff know how to use that equipment and have knife skills and can actually get those foods integrated into the menu offerings. So I have a couple of more examples on the slide. I don't want to linger too long. I know we have a lot of content, but again, just trying to think about what the challenges are for schools trying to serve local food in the federal child nutrition programs, and what project can meet that challenge and create a solution, and through funding from the Farm to School grant program can really be a great success. All right, so this child looks very suspicious of his broccoli, and we don't want that. And this is just a reminder for all of us that the best projects really have an integrated approach. So it's not just about procuring local foods, but what are we doing in the school environment side to ensure that once that local food is on a child's plate, that they are excited, that the food has been prepared in a way that is appetizing and delicious for the student, and that they have some familiarity of where their food comes from and why it would be beneficial for their body and their growth, and how it might integrate into math and science concepts. So again, it's really important that when you're thinking about the project that you're developing, it just depends. If you're targeting agricultural producers and their issues, this will not be as relevant. But for projects that are really directed at schools and the school population, really making sure that your grant project is an integrated approach that not only gets the food on the plate but also provides the education, experiential activity that really gets students invested and excited to eat local. Okay, so we deep dived into the legislative priorities / the intent of the grant program. So make sure when you are developing your project ideas, they are in alignment there. The next piece is really the FY19 priorities. And so these priorities change by fiscal year, and essentially it's just whatever might be going on at the agency level that we want to make sure is kind of in alignment with the way that money is being funded. So for the FY19 priorities, one thing I would like for folks to kind of keep in mind while they're developing their projects is, if you are targeting schools, this is actually an overlap with the legislative priorities, but we're really looking to target schools that have a high proportion of children that are eligible for free or reduced price meals, so schools that may have higher levels of poverty. So, given that our grant program is so incredibly competitive, so for last year, 1 in 5 of every applications were funded, so very, very competitive. We want to make sure that we are sticking with it's recommended that you all really try to kind of hit that mark if you are submitting an application. So you want to give yourself the best chance of, being funded. Really try to make sure that if you're targeting schools that you're targeting kind of high need schools that would benefit the most from this sort of project. In addition, another priority that is a little bit more in your control if you're targeting schools is making sure that you target more than one school. It is fine. You can submit a grant application that only targets one school, but if at all possible, always try to think about scale and try to target more than one school with your activities. The other two are a little bit less malleable or flexible, so you can't control if you are a school district or not, but we do prioritize applications that come in from school districts, and then projects that are serving tribal communities. So building your grant writing team, which is super, super important, and I think a step that is often kind of overlooked in the process. So you want to make sure that you have, a A+ team that is putting their heads together when thinking about this project and actually executing on the writing. So a really, really fantastic grant application package actually takes quite a bit of time and research and careful planning to prepare. So you're going to want to start early. And you're going to want to think strategically about who those individuals are that are sitting around the table helping you flesh out that proposal idea. I can't mention the number of times where we've seen the start of a really good idea, but it just seems like not quite enough thought was kind of given to all of the details of the project and working out everything down the line. So having the right people at the table will really help you to ensure that you have a well thought out project. Even if someone isn't going to be directly writing the grant, it doesn't mean that they can't be on the team. Maybe they can offer a perspective that you wouldn't have thought of due to the expertise that they have. So make sure that you when you kind of have those initial thoughts about what your project might be, that you have the subject matter experts around the table to really make sure that the project is feasible and you're taking into account all of the necessary steps to successfully execute. So who do you put on your team, right? Like, what are some of the kinds of people that you might want to consider having around the table? So I think one way to look at this is to think about what does your project involve. So if you are doing local procurement, you're going to want to have the food service director around the table. Perhaps you'll want to have school administration there. If you work with a food service management company, they probably should be around the table as well. Even students, maybe engaging with students to kind of get an initial idea of, whether or not what kinds of foods might be a good starting place in terms of targeting local. So again, really making sure that you have a robust brain trust of folks with different perspectives and all who have a stake in the project. If you're doing school gardens, again, maybe you'll want to consider food service directors, maybe potential volunteers or volunteer organizations or support organizations that work with schools on school gardening, your school administrator to really make sure are there grounds available? Is it better to do a raised bed versus in the ground plot? Talking to the groundskeepers, just to be clear and make sure that your project is laid on a solid foundation that engages all of the folks that have a stake in the project and that would be affected by the project, and as well as teachers who might serve as volunteers or take their students out to the garden, really engaging with them to see what's feasible and possible. And then last but not least, experiential activities or curriculum. Again, school administration, teachers, maybe the teachers union, support organizations. Again, really thinking about who's going to be involved, who is this going to touch, and what subject matter experts do I need around the table. Okay, so we are going to jump into writing a successful proposal narrative. So for those of you who weren't on yesterday's webinar, I just quickly want to give an overview. The FY19 RFA does have 3 grant track types. The eligible entities do vary by grant track type. Please see the RFA or yesterday's webinar once the recording is posted. And each of the grant track types kind of have a different focus. So planning is really for folks who are beginners. Implementation are for folks who have some experience in farm to school or an existing farm to school program and are really looking to scale and expand on those efforts. And then training is really for folks who are trying to host a training that will provide key players in the food system with the tools that they need in order to get farm to school efforts going in their community, area, state, etc. Okay. So the tips that we're going to provide, so some are going to be applicable for some grant track types while others will be applicable for everyone. So we'll make sure to flag which is which. We clearly do so in the slides. So we're going to start off with some just basic 101 tips. This is applicable for any 3 of the grant track types. So you want to start preparing your application early. The early bird gets the worm. So same thing with this grant application. Make sure that you get started early. Make sure you do not exceed the page limit. So I'm highlighting this because we did change the page maximums from the previous fiscal year. So implementation went down from 10 to 6 pages, planning from 5 to 4, and training from 5 to 4. So make sure that if you are revamping an old application that you submitted in the past, please take care to make sure that it's within the page limit. Some super basic things. In the RFA, we describe what needs to be included in each section of the proposal narrative. Just to make the life of the reviewers easier, just try to put the sections in the same order as they appear in the RFA. Clearly label each of your sections within the proposal, and make sure your timelines do not begin before July 1st, 2019. At the end of the day, you have to keep in mind that the reviewers are reviewing several applications, and you want to make sure that when they're reviewing your application that it is as easy and clear as possible for them to go through it and get the information that they need to appropriately evaluate it. Some additional basic tips: be responsive to the questions in each subsection of the proposal narrative. So many times people miss one question or one part of the question, so make sure that you're answering each part to the best of your ability. Don't write each of your subsections in a vacuum, meaning your need should connect to your background, should connect to your project, to your evaluation plan. It is a comprehensive application proposal, so all of the parts should be connected. So don't write them in a vacuum. Provide more details on the sections that are worth more points. So each of the sections are not graded equally in terms of number of points. So take a look at the sections referenced here in the RFA, and you can see which are worth the most and kind of put more details or effort into those sections. Make sure your application has all required attachments, and we also recommend that after you've written your application, go ahead and give it to someone who is completely unfamiliar with your project and have them use the scoring sheet that's found in the sections referenced on the slide, and they should grade it. And based on what they grade you, go ahead and make those tweaks and try to clarify and make it as clear as possible. Okay, so now we're going to start jumping into the various parts of the project proposal narrative and kind of giving you guys some tips on how to avoid the missteps that we typically see in applications that we receive. So there is, for background and experience, what we see sometimes is, folks are asked to talk about their previous achievements and then to talk about partnerships they hope to build in their current project. And there isn't a clear line or distinction between previous achievements and what's going to be in the current project plan. So just be very clear about that so that it's easy for the reviewer to tell if you've answered every part of the subsection. Again, reference the RFA for exactly what you need in the background and experience section. These are just tips and tricks. Don't forget to tell reviewers how you will overcome the challenges that you have listed. So many times people just list the challenges and don't tell us how they'll overcome them. So this is specific for the implementation and training track. You're going to want to be thoughtful about the previous experience that you share or describe in your proposal. You want to make sure that it demonstrates to the reviewers that yes, based on this experience that I've had in the past, I am well suited and capable to perform the activities that I'm listing in my project proposal. Sometimes people go off on this long tangent about all of the things that they've done, and there's no real clear connection that that experience makes them an excellent candidate to execute the activities they outline in the project section. For those in the planning track, because you're a beginner, we don't ask you about your previous experience, but we tell you to share your farm-to-school vision. So just make sure that farm-to-school vision that you share is in alignment with the activities that you propose later on in your grant application. Okay, need. So the needs section is really your chance to tell the reviewer why your community needs this project. And so this is where you use multiple sources of data, whatever is relevant, to show what the need is and how the data really reflects that. So for folks who are targeting schools, we definitely like to see data as it relates to free and reduced priced lunch eligibility rates. So that provides a really good indicator for us about poverty, but also make sure that we are in alignment with the intent of the grant program and really targeting high-need schools. So this is your chance to be illustrative, be compelling. You don't only have to use quantitative data. It's actually really helpful to provide some of that qualitative data or information about your community that the reviewer wouldn't know, because you have to realize that this reviewer probably isn't directly in your community. So make it very clear, or paint a very clear picture about the unique obstacles and challenges that your target audience faces in terms of farm-to-school efforts and broader issues that farm-to-school efforts could potentially address. So I listed a couple of resources on the previous slide, the CDC, the Census of Agriculture. Here I'd like to flag the USDA Farm-to-School Census, which we have available at the Farm-to-School Census website, and provides a lot of really fantastic information that we collected from schools from across the nation in terms of where they are in procuring local foods and what their challenges are and how many students have been reached and benefit from the program. So you could probably find a lot of fantastic data here in terms of farm-to-school benchmarking or stats for your state or school district. So the project section, this section is actually worth the most points, so you probably want to pay close attention to it and prioritize it. So for training grants, the project section, what we've noticed is that folks will say, we're going to conduct this training in this location. And a lot of times the reviewers are looking for a little bit more information. If you select these locations for your training, tell us why. Is it a high-need state in your state or region? Is it a location that's easy for folks to get to? Really just create that compelling story and show us that you were really thoughtful in each part of your application. So for the planning and implementation grants, you want to make sure, again, that your project supports the grant program intent. We talked quite a bit about that. You want to make sure that your objectives are SMART, so that they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. That's going to be really critical because that will also set you up in a really good place to develop a good evaluation plan. And also just make it very clear for your team what you all are setting out to achieve. Based on your staffing capacity and the length of the grant term that you've selected, make sure that the number of activities that you have listed are in a logical order, right? That you're not conducting research after you've already done something, common sense, right? But also just making sure that it's feasible. Sometimes we see really fantastic projects and they have so many activities, and then you look at the number of people who are executing and you're like, I don't know that all these things can get done. And then the project loses points during evaluation. So make sure you're being realistic and that it's feasible. And make sure that your activities, whatever they may be, are really lined up to achieve the objective under which they are set. So just making sure that you are completely aligned. So really, really quickly, I'm going to zoom through this. I'm providing here a SMART objective example. So again, you want to make sure that it is that 5 criteria that I listed on the previous slide. In addition, I want to highlight that we have an evaluation and reporting webinar that we actually give to grantees once they've been awarded, but I think would also be really useful for applicants. So at minute 1538, you can check out this webinar and we talk a little bit more in depth about what a SMART objective is and what it can look like. But the quick example here is by August 31st, 2021, going to procure at least 100 pounds of local fruit for use in the National School Lunch Program. And so under here you can see that the activities that would accomplish that objective are listed, and it clearly states who is going to execute that activity and by what time. So again, just making sure that you're thoughtful and really showing the reviewers that you understand the key activities that are necessary to successfully achieve that objective. You all do have a page limit to keep in mind, right? So you might be thinking, like, how many activities do I put? Again, you have to stay within the page limit, but I would just think about putting the most critical activities under that objective that really show the reviewer, oh, this person understands the key pieces that need to be done to be successful on this objective. Evaluation. So you just want to make sure that you align your evaluation plan with your project activities. Again, this idea of don't write your subsections in a vacuum. So any objectives that you have listed in your project section should really be mentioned in your evaluation plan, because you're going to want to make sure that you are tracking against that objective and that you're achieving it. So you also want to be as specific as possible. What data are you collecting? When will it be collected? At the beginning, monthly, quarterly? Who will collect and analyze it? And how will that data be collected? So what instruments are you going to use? Again, I want to flag for people, no need to reinvent the wheel. There are so many evaluation tools already out there. This link will provide you a list of some of those things. So you have a limited space to tell us your evaluation plan. So you can just show the reviewer that you've been thoughtful and you looked up resources and you know what you're going to use. And you can say, we are going to use the student student attitude assessment tool found in the Colorado Farm to School toolkit. So again, you don't have to get super detailed, but again, you're just trying to show your reviewers that you have been thoughtful and you've done your research and you are ready to go once you get awarded. A lot of times we see that folks don't mention that they're going to take measurements at the beginning of their project. So probably a good idea to take a baseline so that you can see from the beginning, how you are tracking on your progress. Also, a lot of times we find that folks kind of forget students. So when targeting schools, folks don't always evaluate if students have a change in knowledge about where their food comes from, or skills, or eating behaviors. And these things can be difficult to track, but taking a look at those resources to see if there are any tools at your fingertips that you can use to evaluate progress on that particular indicator. So Travis, forgive me, is this where you step in? I'm on a roll.
I was actually supposed to step in a while ago, Maika, but I can take the last few slides in this section if you'd like.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, and forgive me, did you just switch to this slide or did you just finish this slide?
I just switched to it.
Okay, so I'll take over talking about the staffing, project management, and quality assurance. One of the big issues that we've seen in past applications is not being specific about what the expectations are for the staff members. And one of the biggest problems that the applicants confront is when they've, like Maika mentioned previously, they've mentioned a staff member's roles, but they haven't mentioned how much time that staff member is supposed to dedicate to that project. This is especially true if you're using personnel that you already have in place at the district level or in your organization that have a full-time job, and now you're asking them to commit some amount of time to the Farm to School grant. And we want to see that you're choosing time commitments that are reasonable and that people can actually complete all of their actions and all of their objectives during the amount of time that you've specified. Staffing also brings us to the point about the resume attachments. We only allow 3 resumes this year. We've eliminated the optional attachment option from previous years, so it's important to really be strategic about the resumes that you choose to attach. It's very important that the project director have a resume attached. That's probably the most important personnel member who you want to include a resume for. And you want to make sure that the other resumes that you include are similarly arranged so that the people who are giving big time commitments to the project, who have really heavy lifts on the project, their resumes are included. And this lets the reviewers see that the people you've chosen for the project, they have appropriate experience, they have experience that is going to inspire confidence that the project will be completed. And then if the staff member hasn't been hired yet, or if you're expecting to hire a contractor, it's very helpful to add the job requirements that you're going to have for when you hire that person, or what your expectations are for their roles and responsibilities once they come on board. And speaking of contractors, if you expect them to provide services, you can refer the reader to the letter of commitment, and that'll let you save space in your application, because it is, as Maika mentioned, extremely important that you stay under that page limit. So anything that you can add to the letter of commitment and move away from the proposal narrative will help you save space and help you make the best use of what you have available, both in the letter of commitment and in the body of your application. Speaking of letters of commitment, they're required for the planning and implementation grants only, and just like with the resumes, you're permitted to attach up to 3. And again, you want to be strategic about the letters of commitment you provide. You may be partnering with multiple, you may be partnering with half a dozen or a dozen organizations in your community, but you want to choose the ones that are going to be most closely connected or most critical to the completion of your project. You'll want to consider the people who are directly working on the project, of course, and then you want to consider organizations where maybe if they don't have personnel who are directly working on the project, they're still necessary for completing your goals. And one of the biggest organizations that we see requiring a letter of commitment is a school district. The legislative priorities of the Farm to School program are very much emphasize increasing the amount of local food in school cafeterias and bringing students closer to local foods. So even if you're not a school district employee, it's expecting you to attach a letter of commitment from a school or some school entity or someone that will show, oh, this program is going to increase the amount of local food in schools. This has to be included in the grant application submission, not mailed in separately. There will be a space for this attachment, but again, there's a maximum of 3 allowed. There's no more optional attachments as there have been in previous years, so make sure that you've chosen strategically 3 layers of commitment that show your wisdom in choosing partners. And training grantees have a different requirement. They're only required to show 1 letter of support, and there's more information about that in the RFA. And you can find more information about letters of commitments for all 3 types of grant tracts in the RFA. Sustainability is another piece that is the same for implementation and planning, and in fact training grants don't have this sustainability piece. But the point is to demonstrate to the people reading your application on our end that you have an idea of what's going to happen with your project once the funding from USDA has completed its cycle. So after the 1 year or 2 years that your grant program has been in operation, what's going to happen so that the program itself continues beyond that point? And you're going to be explaining what makes your program irreplaceable, what makes it indispensable to the district or to the producers or to any other entities that you're working with, where any stakeholders are going to say that it would be outrageous to get rid of this program. It's become so important to what we do here in the district or what we do here in the organization. And a lot of that will involve the funding sources you're able to recruit. And it's helpful to the reviewers to be specific about particular grants or loans that you may be applying for to help you continue operations. Any community partners who you expect to help with fundraising or with recruiting additional funds to continue the project. And where the money is going to come from, that now that the grant period has ended, is not coming from the Farm to School grant program, but is going to have to come from somewhere else. And additionally, you want to clarify which activities will continue after the grant period ends, and you also want to be clear about what will happen with staff after the grant period ends as well. Are people who were hired for this grant program going to continue in a full-time position? Will people be hired by the district? Will they continue to be able to contribute their time and resources to working on your Farm to School program even after the grant period is over? And again, discuss how partnerships are going to work. So if you're going to be requiring a lot of input from stakeholders, whether it's fundraising or just advocating for your program at the district level or to other key partners, it's important to be specific about how that's going to work and how your staff and how your program is going to use those partnerships to make sure that it continues past the grant funding period. And now I'm going to pass it over to Anna so she can explain a little bit about the budget and budget narrative and how to be sustainable during your project.
Great. Thanks, Travis. All right. I am going to talk about some of the key issues and tips for submitting a successful budget and budget narrative. Don't run out of steam before you get to your budget, because that is, I would argue, it's just as important as the actual bulk of your project, because you can write a great project, but if you don't tell us how you want to pay for it, we can't fund it. So the first is, one of the forms that is in grants.gov is the SF424A. I don't really expect you to be able to read the actual numbers on this slide, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what it looks like. On the first page of the 424A, there are there's multiple rows. I only captured 2 of them here. One of them you want to type in federal, and that's the amount of money that you are requesting from FNS for your Farm to School grant. The second line is non-federal. You can also type match there if you want. That is your matching amount. So if you have magnifying glasses, you can see over to the right in the yellow highlight under the federal column, it says $100,000. And then the next line, down one line and over one column, is non-federal, and that is $34,000, which is the approximate amount of match you would need to request $100,000 from FNS. Everything that's highlighted in yellow is stuff that I actually physically typed into this form. You can see on the far right that it will total it for you. It's really important, though, that you don't mix your federal and your match together in your budget, because we don't have any way of pulling that out when you put it all in one column or in one row. It'll make a little more sense on the next slide, which is the second page of the 424A. And if you typed in federal and non-federal on the first page, at the top of this page you can see that the federal and non-federal have been auto-populated. You know that because it's not highlighted in yellow. And then the numbers below that I don't expect you to read are highlighted in yellow, and those are the actual budget categories that you need for any grant from FNS. So you would enter the amounts for the different categories where applicable. I entered them for everything but construction. There's no construction on these grants. That doesn't mean you have to have personnel, fringe, travel, equipment, supplies, contractual, or other, but those are the common categories. And then it will tally it for you itself. There's a third page to this form. You can just ignore it, because I know I will when I get your application, so you don't need to fill out the third page. We don't use that information for these types of grants, and that page gives people the most headaches. So for the SF424A, you're just going to fill out the first 2 pages. The take-home message for that is to please be sure that you separate out your federal and non-federal. I had to send a lot of those back last year because applicants would put everything in one column, and I didn't know which was which. Okay, your budget narrative. So the 424A is your budget form. In addition to that, you need to do a budget narrative, and that is where you break everything out, you flesh it out a little bit further, and you describe what is going to be within, what you're going to spend within those categories, and you're going to itemize it a little bit further so we have an idea. Basically, we want to know that you actually did some research and you know what these things are going to cost, rather than doing what I did on the last page and just throwing numbers in there. So some examples for the different line items. You want to put a little more detail. Travel is probably the biggest one, and I have an example of that on a future slide, but you want to say how many trips, how many people are going to be traveling, what is the cost and the purpose of the trip, what is the mode of transportation. You know, airfare is a lot more expensive than paying for mileage. So you want to make sure that you're really clear in your budget narrative. There's a link here in this slide that will take you to the GSA rates for lodging and per diem, and for the area that you're going to be traveling to, you can request up to the amount that GSA pays for that type of travel. This slide says that there is a sample budget narrative available on the grant website. We are actually updating that. So if you go there right now, it'll say coming soon, but we will be putting one up very soon, and it's going to look a lot like the example that I'm going to show you shortly. Some of the other tips in your budget narrative, you want to make sure that the calculations in your line item budget and your budget narrative match. Please check your math, because we will check your math, and sometimes I cannot figure out for the life of me where some people get their numbers. I think in some cases people tried too hard, or I don't even know. But be very clear in your calculations, and please check your math. Again, there's another tip here addressing what I mentioned earlier. Label items within your budget narrative that are going to be purchased with federal funds and those that are going to be purchased with matching funds. And then you want to separate out your first and second year expenditures, also in the example on the next slide. So this is a sample budget narrative, and I hope that you can see this well enough. Again, the numbers themselves aren't important for this example as much as the formatting of this. You can see at the top, and please do this. When you do your budget narrative, please have some kind of header saying who you are and what type of grant you're applying for in case it gets separated for some reason. These get uploaded in grants.gov as separate documents sometimes, and we don't want to lose track of who is who. So towards the top on the right, you can see it's broken out by year 1 and year 2 when applicable, and then it is totaled out. Pro tip, I did this in Excel, and I formatted it as a table, so Excel checked all of my math, well, most of my math for me, and then I saved it as a table, popped it into Word, and saved it as a PDF, so you can submit it that way. So if you can see, let's look at travel. I've got one line item there, cost of travel to the grantee gathering, and then I broke out those costs. We've got airfare, $300 round trip for 2 people is $600. And you can see that the $600 is bolded. So everything that I've got in that category, the subtotals are bolded, and that they add up to I can't even see on my tiny little screen, $2281. You just want to be sure to itemize as much as you can so we know what you're talking about. Itemizing travel costs are another thing that I went back to a lot of applicants for last year, saying you can't just say you need $3,000 for travel. Please itemize it and describe the type of travel. There's also local travel on here, and it's got the approximate number of miles and what your mileage rate is. Indirect costs. Often many applicants will request indirect costs on their grants, which is fine. Those are costs that benefit more than just this grant project. Utility costs, paying for electricity, salary costs for staff that are working not really directly on the grant but are contributing towards the grant. If you want to claim indirect costs, you must provide a copy of your negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. That is an agreement that you will have possibly with a federal agency or a state agency, depending on who you are. For applicants that do not have and never have had an indirect cost rate agreement, you can request a de minimis amount up to 10% of your direct costs. You can only request de minimis, though, if you've never had an indirect cost rate agreement before. Matching funds. So there's a 25% match required for I'm going to mess up here, Maika, the planning and the implementation grants, but not training. Maika can jump in and interrupt me if I'm wrong. You want to...
Sorry, Anna. I just heard for the planning and implementation.
Yeah, it's just for the planning and implementation, not the training grants. So the match requirement is 25% of your match. There is a match calculator tool on the Farm to School website. It's pretty snazzy. It's a spreadsheet, so you can plug in the amount you're requesting, and it will tell you what you need to put forward in match. And we've got a sample calculation here for you.
Sorry, so it is for all 3 grant track types. So you have to do a 25% match for all funding opportunities through the grant program.
Okay, so training as well. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's some examples of things that you can use as your match. Cash or cash in kind, which it could be salary paid to staff that is working on the grant. It can be in-kind materials, the value of equipment that you're going to be loaning or donating, things like that. You want to just document it somehow. You can use timesheets. You can have a receipt for equipment or the specs, the document what the value of that equipment is. And if you have any questions on that, we do have more information in our frequently asked questions on that. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Maika for some additional resources.
So we are at 2:02, so I want to be mindful and respectful of those who have engagements at 2 o'clock. So please feel free to drop from the line if you have to go. Hopefully we can just wrap this up in the next 10 to 15 minutes, including the time for the questions we have in the queue. Very quickly, you should check out our website, usda.gov/farm-to-school. We have a lot of fantastic resources there, so please go ahead and check it out. If you're not, make sure to subscribe to our e-newsletter. The Dirt has a lot of really fantastic updates generally about farm-to-school efforts across the nation, but also we will put in grant program updates. So if we updated the FAQ or if there's any new late-breaking information, we like to send it out through the Dirt. So get subscribed if you are not. Additionally, just make sure that you are checking in periodically on the grant applicant resources page for any updates too. Speaking of the grant applicant resource page, here it is. So as I had stated at the top, please do bookmark this page. It has a lot of fantastic resources that will help you as you're putting together your grant application package. It's also the place where we will be posting these slides as well as a copy of the recording. Additionally, for people who are registered for today, we will be emailing out these resources directly to you all, hopefully by the end of the week. These are some fantastic farm-to-school fact sheets, and it's just 3 of the many that we have on our website. These will probably provide you some really fantastic information about school gardens or procuring local meat or creating that perfect dovetail between cultural highlights, whether it's tribal or other cultural highlights that you'd like to do into your farm-to-school project. So take a look at our farm-to-school fact sheets to get inspired and really help to inform the grant proposal that you're putting together. Last but certainly not least, we have a fantastic team. So we have some of our team which is here in Virginia in the national office, but then we have regional staff that are in the FNS region. So as outlined here on this slide, and if you went to our website, you could grab their contact information should you be looking for resources and can't find it on the website. I would say that because we don't want to give any one applicant an edge over another, we cannot provide any specific hand-holding on fleshing out ideas or what exactly to put in your grant application package. But if you're looking for resources and you can't find it on our website, you can reach out to any one of these lovely folks. Probably the person in your region will be best suited to help you find resources that you may have difficulty pinpointing on the site. So that is the email address for us here in national office. So if the first line of defense is us. If you have, in regards to the RFA, if you have any questions about the RFA, please reach out to farm2school@usda.gov and we will get back to you. And thank you so much for being such an engaged audience. At this time, I think we could go ahead and transition to question and answer. Again, please feel free to hop off if you have other things going on. So Anna, I think that this one would be for you. Regarding the match that cannot be from federal funds, we are a grant-funded program, USDA funds that are a pass-through through Arizona Department of Health Services. Would our staff time and other resources be considered fed and therefore ineligible as match?
I'm afraid that is ineligible. If you are funded with, if your salary is funded with federal dollars, then you cannot use that as your match. Most state-run programs, I know for the school meals programs, the child nutrition programs, there's usually some state funds in there that are not direct federal funds, and you could use those.
Okay, great. I have another question. Does it matter in which category the match non-federal funds are placed in? It looks like they were placed in the personnel category in the example, but I thought maybe put it in other.
Do you want me to take that one? That you can put that match wherever you want. Well, let me rephrase that. You can source that match however you want and then put it in the appropriate category.
This one is fun, Anna. I'm sure we can tag team this one. Can funds cover a portion of staff salary? Yes. Can funds cover construction, a greenhouse, for example? Do you want to take that one, Anna?
Sure. Farm to School grants will not fund permanent construction. So if you have a greenhouse and it is a movable greenhouse, yes. If you have a movable greenhouse that you want to lay a concrete foundation, you can use grant funds for the greenhouse, but you cannot use grant funds for the foundation, nor can you pay for the foundation and claim that as your match.
And another question that typically comes up with this is, can you use funds to revitalize an existing greenhouse? And I'm almost afraid to answer, but Anna, last time we talked about this, that was okay. But I'm going to defer to you.
Say that again. That was a yay, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it was okay.
that one, it would depend, really. I mean, if it was a movable greenhouse, then absolutely. If it's a permanent structure, I don't feel like I can answer that with just that information.
Okay. Okay. So it sounds like if you want to revitalize an existing structure, email the Farm to School inbox, and we can provide additional guidance there.
Yeah, what we do, and we'll give some examples, and we'll put that in our FAQs. This is a good time to ask the questions, because if you email us directly and ask a question that gets a little bit too intricate, we're not going to be able to give you the type of answer that might be seen as special consideration. But when we're making that information available for the whole world to see, then we can get into the nitty-gritty.
Okay. Can you explain what are some options to use as your match, Anna?
Yeah, like we said earlier, it can be cash, as if you're paying for somebody's salary, or if somebody is volunteering, you could count the amount of money that they would normally earn doing the same kind of work. If you want to donate resources, you're going to use funds or provide training materials that you already have on hand. You would just need to be able to say what that amount is worth and then document that in your application.
Perfect. Is the budget narrative counted in the 4-page narrative limit? It is not, and you should reference the RFA. It specifically outlines that. Canned food from school gardens. Wow, this is just like popcorn. Can food from school gardens be distributed to students through methods other than school lunch program meals? State regulations make it difficult to include school garden produce in federally subsidized lunches. Yes, it doesn't have to only be provided through the school lunch program, although if you're launching a school garden, it's ideal if you can try to figure out how to make that garden cafeteria connection. So do it to the best of your ability. Could the use of office space be used toward the match? And would that require submitting a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement? Anna, would you?
Maybe and no. So if the cost of office space is covered by your indirect, you could claim that. You could use that as part of your match, but you would not be able to also claim indirect on that grant. That would be double dipping. And there's no way, if it's something that's covered by indirect, there's just no way to pull that out and still claim indirect. But yes, if you're not claiming indirect and you want to do office space, you have to be able to monetize it, though. You have to say, what it is worth. And it has to be office space that's going to be used for the Farm to School grant, obviously.
Okay. So I have two questions that I feel like I could kind of answer at the same time. Is there a comprehensive list of currently funded projects and locations? Yes, there is. So if you go to the Farm to School website, which I have the link in the slide. On there, if you go to Grant Program and scroll to the bottom, you'll see Grant-related resources, and under there you'll see Grant Awards to date. Once you click there, by fiscal year, you will see a list of awards, and so you'll see the organization, the state, and a brief summary of what that application was all about. And then someone else asked, is there an implementation proposal available for review? Unfortunately, at this time we do not have a full application available for posting, so no, there is not one available. I lost my spot because another question came in. Can you use grant funds to purchase a refrigerated van? I'm going to say no, and I'll let Anna talk a little bit about that because I believe vehicles are not an allowable expense. Is that right, Anna?
Yeah, we do not allow vehicles. You could lease a van, but we do not allow the purchase of vehicles for these grants. And the reason for that is that while, if you dive into the Code of Federal Regulations, you'll see that vehicles can be purchased with grant funds, but due to the nature and the length of these grants, you cannot purchase them. The disposition requirements of the vehicle when the grant is ended is a lot more work for both applicants or for the grantees and for FNS, so we just don't permit it. But you can lease one.
Okay. And then also people can purchase like a trailer though, right? Because the trailer isn't a vehicle, it's an attachment.
Yeah. That was a lovely little loophole that we found.
Just wanted to share with the people. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Anna. So another question we have here. We have a very small rural school district. If our district is the lead applicant, but the project only serves the schools within our district, the project will serve fewer than 1,000 students. Can we still be competitive in this process? Yes, you can. We do take into account that rural areas will have a less dense population than urban areas, so it's less about the number of students and how many schools you are reaching. So if you're targeting your whole school district, that makes you very competitive, and so you should not worry. Is there a limit on the narrative section? So I'm not sure which narrative you might be referring to. So the proposal narrative does have a limit, and the limit is by grant tract type. Implementation is a 6-page limit, single-spaced. Training and planning is a 4-page limit, single-space. Budget narrative and the itemized budget document that are required attachments do not count towards those limits. Is there a limit on the length of the budget narrative? No, we actually don't have a limit, but be thoughtful and concise while including all the information that is necessary for the budget narrative. Do grant funds allow for the purchase of modern technology to engage with students and relate to modern learning environment? For example, iPads with soil and irrigation tracking, computers that have vegetable garden software planning and growing. Yes, that would technically be an allowable project, but again, just make sure that you're within the intent of the grant program. So how is that going to increase access to local foods in the federal child nutrition programs, or how is that going to get kids more apt to engage and eat local foods? So just making sure if you make that connection, then that could potentially be an allowable project. Who do you submit a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement in the state of Tennessee? Oof, Anna?
It depends on who you are. If you are a state agency, then you would get it from a federal agency, and I'm sure you probably already have one and you just don't realize it. Often it is through the U.S. Department of Education, but they really vary state by state. If you are a school, you might want to check with your State Department of Education and see if they have one. And if you are absolutely positive, talk to your fiscal folks. If you're absolutely positive that you don't have one, then you can just request up to 10% de minimis, which is in some cases higher than what an indirect cost rate agreement would allow anyway.
Thanks, Anna. All right, we're going to try to wrap this up in the next 5 minutes. We do have a lot of questions, but we will try to do so to follow up with folks after via email. I think I've answered this question about whether or not this will be available. So can a nonprofit still submit a grant proposal to provide educational programming and food growing gardens on school campuses for a school district, or does the school district itself need to be the lead applicant? Nonprofits are an eligible entity, so they are well positioned and able to submit this grant proposal as was described. I really suggest that folks watch the first webinar, which talks about who's eligible for what and kind of breaks down allowable activities by the different grant types. I think it'll really help to provide further clarification for this webinar. Just a clarification question. Is this an annual grant opportunity? Yes, this is. We typically give out $5 million annually. This year it will be $7.5 million due to some additional monies that was released through the FY18 Omnibus Bill. So please check out the first webinar. It'll have details about these kinds of questions. Do implementation project applications need to include educational activities and community partnership to be competitive? And if so, to what degree? Our project is primarily focused on increasing local food procurement in cafeterias. No, you do not have to have that education component. Again, just thinking about the best practices, if you're increasing local procurement, what kinds of other activities might be good to do or implement to ensure that once those foods are in the program, that students are apt to eat it and enjoy it. So no, to be competitive, you do not have to have education curriculum, but see what would make sense for your project, and that you're being comprehensive in making sure that once the foods are introduced, that students will be excited and apt to eat that food. Is CACFP allowable in this grant, or is this just for schools? No, CACFP is allowable for this grant. However, that CACFP or SFSP site must be at a school. So that is the only stipulation. I do not understand how the negotiated cost rate agreement works and what it is for. Anna? Would you be able to provide a little insight?
So earlier when we talked about what indirect costs are, if you have staff that just like office staff that are indirectly working on the grant, whether they answer the phone or they handle the payroll for people that are working on the grant, or if it is to a portion of your utilities or space rent that sort of, for lack of a better word, touch the grant activities but aren't direct grant activities, those are indirect costs. And in order for you to claim them in your grant, you have to have an agreement saying this is the percentage of the direct cost. So let's say you want to request a $100,000 grant. A portion of that would be, well, let's say $90,000, and your indirect cost rate is 5%. So your indirect costs would be $4,500, and they would go towards paying for the utilities, paying for the staff for that payroll clerk, or paying for other things that come up that are related to the grant but aren't the direct activities.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. I think we're just going to do about 2 more questions, and then the rest I will try, or maybe 3. So it says $20,000 to $50,000. Can you also apply, say, for $5,000 to get started if you have a limited cash match, or how much can be an in-kind match? So the ranges for the grant tracks are just that. So if you are applying and the range is $20,000 to $50,000, your request should be within that range in terms of the federal funding requested. Again, you have to provide a 25% match of the total project cost. Then The RFA has word count. Does that fit into the 6-page limit? Yes, we provided a suggested word count for each of the subsections for the proposal narrative, and it should be in alignment with that maximum page limit for each grant tract type, but some words are longer than others. So at the end of the day, you are being held to the standard of that page limit. So we just provided that suggestion for the subsections so you could kind of think a little bit about how much of the total 6-page limit should be dedicated to that particular piece based on the number of points that you can get for that section. So just a suggestion, you could totally ignore those subsection word count limits, but you do have to adhere to the maximum page limit. Timeline question, can the start date be August 2019? We suggest that you start no earlier than July 1st, 2019. Anna, is there an issue with having a month of no activities and starting in August?
Not as long as you stipulate it in the application. Just know that there's also circumstances outside of our control, so we might want these grants to start on July 1st or June 1st, and for whatever reason they don't start until later. So we're going to put a full 1-year or 2-year period of performance on the grants, but you can start August 1st if you want to.
Okay, thank you. So really quickly, some folks had questions. Can a resume be for a contractor? Yes, you can certainly submit a resume for a contractor. We just ask that you be strategic in who you submit resumes for versus who you submit letters of commitment for, because there is a maximum of 3 for each of them. So you may want to consider having that contractor if they are a key partner on your project, so maybe you're giving them some of the grant funds to execute the evaluation. Instead of submitting their resume, maybe it's better to just have a letter of commitment from them that shows, yes, if this is awarded, like, I'm going to be a part of this grant project, here's my expertise, this is the role that I'm playing on this project. We actually specifically outline in the RFA the pieces of information that are required for the letter of commitment. So that's why we recommend, for a key partner, you probably want to just use the letter of commitment, which will then open you up to providing a resume for another key staff member who probably would not be best suited for submitting a letter of commitment, if that makes sense. I have a question. Must the school garden program necessarily also include an effort for the cafeteria to procure local foods beyond the amount that is grown, harvested in the school garden? No, it does not. But in thinking about the intent of the grant program, ultimately that's what we're seeking to achieve. Increased amounts of local food in the federal child nutrition programs, and we know that school garden outputs can be limited. So also getting the food service department looking at local procurement activities beyond the garden is something to be considered if you are submitting a grant application. Is it required? It is not. But to make yourself stand out as much as possible, I think it's always good to be thinking about it. And if you can include, that would be great. But if you cannot, nope, you're still competitive. Okay, it is 2:26. I think it is time to shut up shop here. We still have quite a few questions in the queue, but we will do our best to follow up with people via email. I want to thank you all for being such a fantastic crowd and hanging in there 26 minutes afterwards. Thank you. We hope that this was helpful. If you have not watched our webinar from yesterday, please check in on the Grant Applicant Resources page. It will be posted there, and it really has some fantastic information. I was seeing some questions about eligibility, and some of that was already answered in yesterday's webinar. Again, if you have eligibility questions, allowable activity questions, the FAQ is amazing, really, really good for that. We're going to be getting that link updated on the Grant Applicant Resource page, but in the meantime, you can go to the grants.gov link, which is just clicking that RFA link on our Grant Applicants Resource page to access the FAQ. It'll be in the Related Documents tab on grants.gov. All right, I think we have sufficiently talked everyone's ear off for this afternoon. Thank you for being a fantastic audience, and have a great rest of your afternoon.